Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Altmed podcast. With me as always, my co-host Mitch Kurtz. How you doing, Mitch?
Hey, very good on my microphone, which you don't have at the moment.
I know you've really gone up a level with equipment. Headphones looking good too.
Thank you.
Well, our guest and myself are on the humble microphone and audio setup, but it is our pleasure to introduce a friend, someone we really admire in the industry more broadly. It's CBD Luke from the Northern Rivers region. Luke, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, gentlemen. I appreciate it.
Thank you for being had.
Yeah, it's no, we've been wanting to chat for a while. I think some of our audience might already know you. You are a bit of a celebrity in the space. Following your starring role in the Greenlight film, and that's something we might get to shortly, because gosh, there was so much media that spun off out of that, and a lot of people that I know think that it's really cool that I know one of the guys or both guys from that film. But yeah, perhaps before we dive there, can we maybe get your background and how you fell into the space of dealing with CBD and your background and journey into that?
Sure. Well, for me, it was about assisting someone that was really close to me. But, I grew up around cannabis and growers, and, so it's sort of in the fabric of my, or the weave of my fabric, I should say. It's that, my father, other people that as I was growing up, that was something that they'd done in their past. And so it was, for me, I dabbled around with growing, and to be quite honest with you, I'm not very good at it. So I was always around it. I took to it as a young person myself, and had what I'd call a kind of a love-hate relationship with cannabis. And the way that I was using it for many, many years it was both a pleasure and a pain. Alongside of other things. So I had this kind of intimate relationship with cannabis that taught me a lot, but was also quite challenged because I was misusing it. And the sort of end result of that, after many years of creating some balance with that, was starting to be actually educated myself about it, about its value and its medicinal qualities. So there was a conversation being had overseas that was starting here, and that really piqued my interest because of my own experience with it. And so I started to learn about CBD, which was a bit revelatory, really, just that there was, this plant had balances for so long of things that I had no idea about. I didn't know about cannabinoids. I knew about Delta 9 THC, and so I started to become really fascinated. I love chemistry, but I had made no close study of the plant at that level of this new understanding that there was all of these cannabinoids and that they exerted different effects. And so I became fascinated with, medicines and poisons. A poison is often a medicine, just taken a little too much. So learning about that helped me to understand. I'm just going to have to move offices. Sorry, the computer here is getting a bit low. So understanding about those. You all right?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Oh, we love a little bit of extra flavor in some of our podcasts. So
nice. Well, you're talking to an arch Luddite here. It's amazing. Honestly, I think this is the first Zoom call I've ever made. So,
well, we're honoured.
Believe it or not. So, so that sort of journey of understanding what had been going on with myself, and then putting CBD into the mix and watching the way that my relationship with THC changed so much and really came into balance. I understand that there was a cohort of people who either had been heavy cannabis users and were having some side effects that weren't so good later on, or people that were seeking to be introduced to cannabis that already had some of those less pleasant side effects of cannabis use that could meet in the middle, and you can have CBD medications with reasonably low percentages, but still enough to exert a really awesome benefit. So I was very, very excited, but at the time, it was also just around a dear friend of mine that was dying, as I mentioned before, and he was a wonderful, tough old mentor friend that I decided I'd grow for, because he had cancer. The guy went years past his diagnosis. He was pissing out chunks of tumor, and he had these big bags on his back for his urine, and he was just this tough old guy that kept on giving to people so much. But he was such a Scrooge. He was so tight. So he wouldn't buy this. He got some cannabis to make this cannabis medicine. It was the worst pot I'd ever seen in my life. It was so rank. I'd barely call it viable compost. So I said to him, listen, if I go and grow for you, will you take it as a medicine, and we'll see how you go? Because he was also a little bit, even though he was a plant medicine guy, ayahuasca and other things, he was a bit down on pot, and that's something that's changed dramatically as on a societal level. There was quite strong feelings about it, and so he said he would. I said, okay, so if it heals you, you've got to pay for it. So anyway, I went about growing, and lightning hit the patch of bushland down near where I live. I've been growing.
Oh, no.
Been growing in the bush, and lightning actually cooked about 20 acres. So anyway, that got burnt to the ground. I thought, all right, that's bugger it. I'm gonna do this. So I went and replanted in the same spot, and there was a bit of potash around after the bushfires. But it turned out that I was about halfway through that, and he called me up and said that he'd decided it was time for him to die, and so. I went around and hung out with him, and one of the promises I made is that I'd go and give this to whatever I grew, and that I'd go and give it to some people. So, and as much as I could to as many people as I could. And so that was the agreement I made with him, and that sort of spawned my going to the community with this plant. Honestly, that what I got off the grow was barely enough to make anything in terms of oils. So I took to some relationships with some really good growers around here. There's a lot of good growers around here. Some not the perfect growing conditions. And you got bugs from the sky with big rotors on them occasionally, but there's still some great growers around here and some great herbs. So I figured let them do that, and I'd go out and actually give the medicine to people. So that's what I've been doing ever since, is getting the medicine to the people in whatever way that they need and they can.
Yeah, amazing. And there's a few people that might say they've seen a few patients over the medical journey, but I imagine you might leave a few of them for dead. With the number of people you would have seen since that story took place. Any kind of rough figures, or do you know how many people you've met that have been looking for, or in one shape or form, some kind of alternative? Or
wouldn't that be the entire population of the Northern Rivers region?
It could be.
Mate, to be honest with you, I couldn't really put a number on it, but there was several thousand people ended up having my phone number at the point where I decided to stop being
contactable.
Front line, well, just the front line of patient contact. At times it really felt like this kind of, there's this battle for patient rights and all this thing, and so I felt that was the front of the front line, being with these people that were often so distressed from their circumstances already, and then add on to that the stress of not being able to actually access a medicine that they wanted to explore whether it could help them. So that's the position that I occupied. So it felt like that was my task for a long time, and when I got to a point where these thousands of people had my number, and I just realized that I'd had really incredible experiences with people. It was an amazing journey, and there was just, the fact is that I wasn't able to continually give adequate care to that many people. And I knew heaps of people doing it. Like the networks that have been servicing the needs of patients is actually, it's a huge and wonderful web, really. It's like, it's a kind of underground web that spanned the country for so long. And now we've got this extra access points through the license model, which is delightful. We couldn't ask for anything more. That was what I was doing there. So in many ways, these thousands of people that I've been in contact with have now got the choice at the time that they didn't have, to nearly the same degree, because even though this network was so widespread, obviously that it's not like something that was advertised. So that people's access points at a micro level, people's access points are really limited. Now you can call up a doctor, and in 10 minutes you can have a script, and it can be posted to your front door. And imagine how good that is for people that are compromised in so many ways and in lockdown and so forth. So it's kind of perfect timing for the lockdown story, actually, that it's able to be accessed legally now so well. So, you know, for all what a perfect kind of medicine, as much as it could be said that something could be perfect for all those people that are in, you know, not great circumstances being locked down, but isn't it great they can access it? So that's
and we've seen a lot of growth thanks to telehealth and the uptake on that, especially in the recent times with obviously the ever-present COVID that we're experiencing at the moment.
For sure, but that's what makes that model possibly even more, you know, that's its time, because before that, I don't think before COVID happened that people are actually that open to telehealth. You know, in many ways, part of the issue that we were experiencing was lots of people, like a large amount of people saying, oh, I can't speak to my local GP about it, and so I feel uncomfortable with it. And so the COVID thing has driven people online and open to that so much more. So good time for that. You know, I think it was from one of you gentlemen told me the figures of what CBD, what are the guys up on Burley Heads, CDC, what they're doing, you know, in terms of the amount of scripts they're writing. That is a significant amount of people being able to access these days.
And they're, you know, they're one of the bigger players, but yeah,
they're one of many still, right? I mean, how many people are visible now? If you just Google it, there's a list of them. Green Pharma, who are, by the way, I think are awesome for doing their latest venture. I'm sure you saw what they're doing there with psilocybin research for people. I couldn't be happy about that. What a great way to.
Yeah, you could. We've said this before, but you could almost say that cannabis is a bit of a gateway drug for the other ones that are coming through now.
Well, it's actually on that point. I mean, what you were describing, Luke, in your journey, and sort of where it led to in terms of, which I think was so beautifully captured in the Green Light film. And to anyone listening, if you haven't seen that film, it's really is you know, some of the best 70 minutes you'll ever see. It's just fascinating. But you talking about your journey of, and you know, like you, I certainly first became introduced to cannabis through recreational side. And it blows my mind that some people these days, their first looking at cannabis is as a medicine, you know, and that to me is just like, but as you say, you know, a poison can be a medicine, and it only becomes a poison when it's sort of overused. But the juxtaposition between, you know, sitting around and maybe indulging and partaking a little bit too heavily with mates recreationally, to the place that is depicted in that film, where you had people that were kind of on their knees, you know, they're sort of their last resort, just seeking help from anyone who would listen, anyone that could, you know, provide them with an alternative medicine. I mean, did it get to a point where you just thought, oh, this is actually too hard, I need to step back from this, because it's now becoming emotionally too much of my life, I don't have any bandwidth left for myself, my family? Is that sort of
all of those things? Well said, actually. You know, that's there was for, you know, an extended period of time there, particularly around when the film was made, things started to change. By the time from when the film was made and when it came out, there started to be significant shifts towards patient access and availability. But at the time, particularly, was you know, I realized that I was spending so much time with this side of things that my family, my new child, my family, that I had lost a lot of connection there with them, and that I was obsessed with this, and that I was extending myself beyond, which was reasonable. But I saw that also that was part of what needed to happen. But there came a time where absolutely I felt roast. You know, I was burnt out, and I was, you know, I had these wonderful people around me, these people I was working with, and they were supportive of stepping back and actually sharing that workload with other people. So that became that was a great step, actually. That kind of you know, it being too much to bear was perfect to, you know, take the next step, which was to start working with the people that were working with patients. So that was formed the sort of next part of what I did, was provide assistance to the providers of this network that we were assisting patients to receive medicine from. So that then sent a lot of work out to other people who were really wanting to be on the front line, whose calling was right there. And so that was awesome to be able to just pass that on and give more background assistance to people. Now I still see patients, but it might be a couple a week, it might be, you know, 10 a week, it might be it's a very small thing that I can actually be present with people. And that was the most important thing, is feeling like these people were getting, it wasn't about me, as these people needed more, they needed better care, and they need someone that could be present with them, because I started to find myself just being overwhelmed. And at that point, then it's no longer a good duty of care to continue what I was doing. So I had to just take that part of myself and move on to assisting others who obviously had that, they step forward with that much spirit. You can see when someone's keen to be in that position. And then, you know, a lot of people that I've worked with over the years have taken a step back from it because they get too much load. You know, it's without a lot of professional assistance and the backing of the medical field or whatever, there's a lot of it that, you know, it's difficult territory to tread. You know, there's a lot of ethical stuff around it. There's so much that comes up that I think is the background to a provider's existence, really. That sort of runs you those concerns, those also the understanding and the hope that there's going to be better guidance in place than what I as a person can give. You know, I'm like a paramedic to a patient that's in this state of emergency. Often that's how I felt. But, you know,
that makes sense.
I'm not a doctor, you know, and the plant was in its own way as a doctor, and I'd see that as the doctor in hospital. But really, the structures that we needed in place and that we're working towards now, they just weren't there, and that was you know, difficult to watch and difficult to be a part of. And so, you know, I'm once again really happy that things are moving so much more that way. We don't feel this sense of urgency bearing down on our organisation at all times. You know, we feel a sense now of people are coming and they're interested and they have an element of choice, and there's still the sadness that many of them are very sick and dying is there, and that's real. But that urgency, this lack of choice that people had, and that desperation that they were having to seek something illegally, you know, and feel that concern as well as what they're already going through as people, that's been alleviated greatly. And that's a big thing. There's a big shift has happened since those times.
And I think, you know, we've only had medicinal cannabis legally in its current form since the end of 2016, and really only access from 2017, if you think about it.
It was a long time where it went absolutely nowhere, where legal didn't mean accessible one bit, and without accessibility, it may well not been legal at the time.
Curious what kind of year you were kind of coming into the scene, or how long before?
Oh, okay, so I was chatting to the person that we ended up, you know, the person that ended up forming an organisation with, and then we'd pegged it about sort of 7.5 years. So it was
right. So about 2009-ish.
So yeah, there's something like that.
Thereabouts. Wow, amazing. And
2009, no, we got 7.5 years. So what are we? 2021,
2008, 2009,
2012. Yeah.
Oh, it's from now back. Oh, from now. Sorry, I was thinking from before. Gotcha. Right. Gotcha. Right, yeah. Okay, so still quite a few years there.
Yeah, there was a long time where it was very, very fresh. There was just no. It was still very much a cannabis as what we'd known it as. The conversation politically was still very strident. The media was still very much mired in the pot cannabis drug story back then. And that the change in that is massive. It's significant that a whole society can change its attitude so much, and then the media end up getting on board and things like that. So it's been a really shit, slow and laborious, glacial, all sorts of other slow and kind of fucked up process over time, but it's at least going, if you want to say that, it's at least going where it needs to now.
That's a medical term, I think. It's okay.
So over time, you can see a change that didn't feel like it for most of the time in its segments.
Well, I think
at the time it felt frustrating, and it still is. I still note that there's people that are still, you know, it's broadening, and doctors are much more educated and helpful, I'm sure, in assisting patients to get what they need. But it's still a concern for many people that it's not more open, and I hope that we go a lot further. So
absolutely.
My delight in how things have changed in the macro doesn't stop me from wanting to see things change dramatically more to improve patient access in heaps of ways that I think it still needs to be.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that I sort of felt a sense of in the aftermath of that movie that you're in Greenlight was just that often you don't see progress, politicians, policymakers, bureaucrats, people don't necessarily drive reform to access or things like this unless there's a spotlight shone on the inadequacy of it. And I guess one of the reasons why I felt like what you and Nick did was brave is you stood up, you represented what you described as like a network across the whole country of people that were facilitating access for so many people that couldn't get in via the legal pathway. And you just sort of said, here I am, this is what I'm doing. And I'm trying to help people and bridge a gap. And it was sort of in a way that the documentary felt a bit like an investigative journalism piece, in the sense of it just ripped the Band-Aid off and said, here is a huge problem that we have. We apparently have a legal system, but no one can access it. And this is what day-to-day people, this is what their story is. And this is how they're getting access to it. And so, I mean, for starters, as a first comment is just to commend, you and Nick on your bravery in doing that. But I really do. It sounds like you're in obviously a better place now with not being so relied upon. But I think, if it weren't for you doing that and being so brave, I don't know if we would have seen the improvements necessarily that we've had over the last couple of years that seem to have really accelerated in the aftermath of the negative publicity that the government received following that film. Do you sort of share that view or have any other views on that?
I would say, what you're saying is accurate to a piece of a very large puzzle, and the large puzzle is made up of so many people, so many patient stories. There was a long time where there nearly wasn't a day where there wasn't a media piece on a patient or something that had happened to do with the legislation. Like it was a growing debate that grew and grew and grew and grew. And I think we were just one little piece of a large puzzle that ended up really turning out to drive change. We were effective in our little bit, but so many other people, and just the amount of patient stories, some of the stuff that people did to show love for their children by risking so much to come and speak to the media, that's just, it's so moving that these people went and did that. It really is. And so we were glad to be a part of that in our own way. And so, but that does, I guess, show a little bit of I could almost call it the edge of desperation. Well, and for many, desperation that we were feeling, that we felt like we actually needed to say things in that way so publicly. But we made a clear line between what we were there to do and what the more emotional part of ourselves we might want to lash out or get angry about lots of things. But we decided that how we really felt is that we just need to speak for patients and for access rather than against anyone or anything that was stopping it. Just speak for people's needs. And I think that was an effective way of reaching a lot of people. We didn't receive the potential negative side effects that we were deeply concerned about. And I wanted to ask about that. Film, mate. I lost more sleep over that film than you.
Yeah, like if you think about it, right? If you think about it, it's quite a risky step in a lot of ways. And I would imagine you would have been thinking, constantly about law enforcement,
dawn raids from the special ops group and all that sort of
Nick said there were helicopters over the house at different state, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, he got caught for some plants and stuff. And it was the daily feeling of that needing to wake up and process the amount of, I guess, anxiety that I'll speak for myself. I was processing a lot of anxiety just to get to the point where I'm ready for my day. And so I was running on this kind of adrenaline and anxiety.
Did you have CBD for that, or?
Mate, I stopped using a lot of THC though, to be honest with you. So I started using CBD just more frequently, and so.
And did you have it there? Just if you had the police show up to your address, obviously they're going to be stressed about doing some sort of an arrest or something like that. So you had CBD supplies for them as well. Is that sort of how?
Yeah, I had it lined up. Well, no, there's plenty for them, I'm sure. But look, what I thought that I knew was that we were also occurring at a time where the debate was shifting so much, and that I didn't, in many ways, I didn't feel directly threatened by the you know, I don't think the government stance was particularly hostile towards people in many ways that it had been before. So instead of, you know, I concentrated more on how it had been and how that had changed. You know, there was, you know, I'd had incidences of being apprehended with medicine in large enough amounts to constitute a very indictable issue. And the interactions ended up being, I think, fair and equitable to the situation itself, not to how things could have been in the very, you know, recent past. So I was, you know, there was a mixture of things, but I also felt that aside from the anxiety and the fear and all of that stuff that's natural, that was happening and concerns, there was also this sense that people really supported us. It might be the area we're in, I don't know. Other people had different experiences. There's well-documented cases of that in the media. But once again, we were just speaking for people and doing something for people. I'm not on social media. It was one of the choices I made to be not making public statements really. And that ended up, you know, changing into doing some, you know, I was doing conferences and things like that and speaking for things. But it was a fine line for me because I saw what happened when people either, particularly, you know, one of the biggest issues with the sort of the green market cannabis network is that publicly there was people feuding a lot. So there was the most strident voices of any movement get the most attention, and some of the voices within this particular movement were fairly strident and fairly adversarial and fairly difficult with each other particularly. So it didn't feel like there was a lot of cohesion going on. So I watched people on either social media or in the mainstream media just turn on themselves and each other really, and I saw that go pretty poorly for some people, and so I was happy to not take part in any of that. So I felt comfortable with that you know, that there was enough, I guess, social and media acceptance and then pressure starting to build, and that government would follow suit at some point in time. So once again, it felt super frustrating in its small increments, but taken on a whole, it was heading somewhere that it now is far more there.
And speaking about stories like that, I feel like it would be remiss of me not to ask if there are any stories along the journey, anonymized, of course, that, or even patient stories, you know, of access or particular indications or illnesses that people came. What were the common things that people would come? Was it more anxiety? Was it cancer type indications? What were the types of things, and then what types of stories might you have generally, let's say? Yeah.
Well, you know, what do you want to know? Like, yeah.
Well, I mean,
I don't know where to go with that one. Like, I guess I feel, you know, as far as patients go, a lot of that sort of, you know, confidential to their individual cases. But
sure,
I'll definitely talk broadly, and then maybe myself. But the cancer was such a big one, and that was, you know, maybe 30 or 40% of all calls were related to cancer. What I did find overwhelming, also not being a medical doctor, is that there was maybe countless. I couldn't tell you how many different types of conditions people were looking for some treatment potentially for. Yeah. And so there's no way that you know, that would be specialized across 20 different doctors, that just the cases that I saw. So that was also something that we noted was just a huge amount of things. And I think that's now become more apparent what it is really good for, and some of the things it was great for, some it wasn't. I think cancer still is a large area of needing a lot of research being put into it. I've been hearing recently from Israel and the States that they're talking about there being some of the minor cannabinoids that they're looking at as actually being the effective part of cannabis for particular cancer treatments. So a lot of that's, you know, proprietary knowledge that's being spoken about more broadly than definitely, but that's what I'm really interested in, is to see what comes out of that side of things. So cancer, you know, the anxiety, of course, you know, we're well placed to speak on that one.
Yep.
And that was, it looks, sleep disturbance, things like that, pain of so many kinds, be it emotional or physical, or you know, so I could speak all night about the amount of different conditions that people came with, and some things were amazing, watching a guy come in a wheelchair and then come back 2 weeks later on some crutches. that was super cool. He hadn't been out of a wheelchair for years after a big accident, and then these degenerative diseases that set in with his immune system. So seeing someone walk up the stairs on some crutches after being hoisted up by two people in a wheelchair, you know, things like that are so deeply moving, you know, and the children that were seizing so much, you know, if you hold a baby that is having a seizure, and, you know, I'm a father now, and the parents of those children, what they go through, it's beyond words, really. And so seeing a child like that come to being still and being at peace, and the parents being able to connect from a place other than just this huge amount of concern is unforgettable kind of experiences, you know.
Imagine, yeah, it would be. So, okay, so it's pretty, I guess, consistent with what we see in the medical sphere with you know, it being prescribed for things like pain and anxiety and sleep, and probably neurological disorders, Parkinson's, that type of thing as well, epilepsy. So that's good to hear. Now, there is actually one thing that I've been meaning to chat to you about, and I wanted to get your thoughts on something we haven't actually discussed yet. Delta 8.
Oh, Mitch.
I just had to drop it in the middle. I know it was unprecedented. We're in a flow.
I said I was so open. I wanted to talk about everything. I'm an open book. Can't talk about that. No, I'm happy to talk about it.
It's actually something that has been coming up into my periphery a lot more of late, especially in America.
It's been popping up a lot, and you know why? Because it bloody well should.
Okay, so hang on. But there's some of our listeners won't know what Delta 8 is. So I don't know, Luke, or Mitch, someone's got to
I'll let Luke do a quick introduction. It seems to, I know that he has a little proclivity towards this direction. So I'm just very keen to hear Luke speak about Delta 8.
All right. Okay. I thought I'd be doing this at an investor meeting, but you know, your podcast is a great place to polish it. So okay, so Delta 8 is something that's not, it's very, very finite if produced at all in nature itself. It is present to some small degrees, but when put under heat, pressure, and pH changes, to just be really, you know, to put it in layman's terms, the molecule of CBD, and particularly CBD isolate, is easy to do this from. You can turn CBD isolate into Delta 9 THC, which converts into Delta 8 THC faster than the Delta 9 is being created, to the point where you can start with a lot of CBD converting to Delta 9, and then it ends up being a very swift conversion over to Delta 8. So you can end up with very tiny amounts of Delta 9 and really large amounts of Delta 8 THC. So you could call it like a cousin of THC or an isomer. But what's fabulous about it is once this conversion's been done, you can then get a cannabinoid screen, and you can get 8 different cannabinoids. So we take this plant, isolate it, and then put it under a few very basic conditions, and suddenly you've got this amazing transformation, this stream back into other cannabinoid groupings. It's one of the things that's so damn fascinating about this plant, is that it has so many ways it can go. And Delta 8 THC, I would call it the very, very the Goldilocks cousin of Delta 9 and every other cannabinoid that I've come in contact with, because it has so many of the positive benefits of Delta 9 and so many of the positive benefits of CBD right in the middle. So some of the less attractive things about Delta 9 that many people experience. You know, there's a lot of people that the Delta 9 just doesn't work for them. And that's because it can either make you overthink things, self-consciousness, and people can get paranoid, they can freak out, dysphoria, anxiety, all the things that it actually helps so many people with. It can also be quite causative for many people with. So, you know, and then we've got CBD, which is so benign. It can still be quite strong if you use enough of it to have, you know, the Delta 9, if it's in a whole plant form, affect you. But once you go to Delta 8, you have this, it's very powerful, strong stuff. It's a wonderful sedative. I think it is absolutely the thing for sleep and for anxiety if dosed in the right way and mixed with the right other appropriate amounts of CBD, particularly for day use. So you can turn this thing into a anxiolytic stimulant. So an anxiolytic on your central nervous system, neurostimulant, for the daytime use, and then at nighttime in a different grouping or a different percentage ratio of cannabinoids, you can end up with this incredible sleep aid. It is the best thing for sleep. It could absolutely do away with the need for benzodiazepines of any kind for nearly like 8 out of 10 people that I've given it to. It has this incredible effect where you don't get paranoid, you don't get all those kind of things, and you get this incredible sleep and sedation out of it. So it's a very, very interesting cannabinoid, and my understanding is in that it's largely being tolerated, particularly in the US. And we obviously don't we don't follow all laws from there, but if we get that tolerated widely, then that could translate into its availability. And I think that one, even more so than CBD, has the potential to reach a whole cohort of people who are otherwise stuck on really heavy drugs. For something as basic as sleep. And my own sleep patterns myself, I guess a little tale. I decided I'd test whether whether it would be as good for benzo withdrawal. Benzos being things like Valium, benzodiazepines, that a lot of people are taking in a very habit forming, very effective, but very habit forming, and the side effects of getting off can be just catastrophic for many people. So I decided after its use and giving it to a few people that had benzo issues and watching them go into the very calm, sedated place without being freaked out, I thought this is going to be great for benzos and for people coming off opiates, because people who are on benzos are often not, I notice there's less people within that take these benzodiazepines that actually that THC works out well with. They're looking for something to switch off often, and that cannabis can be both good and bad for that, depending on the person and the product, as we know, so many different types. So I thought that'd be interesting. And then with the opiate users, people that they have a relationship with that, it can be very hard to break for them because of the physical withdrawals as well. So I decided I'd give myself a benzodiazepine habit. I wasn't willing to give myself an opiate habit and go that far. But I had used Valium myself in the past when I was, polydrug using regularly. I had used it and had some kind of understanding of what it was, but it wasn't until really I started, doing the cannabis thing myself that and started to get a lot of the anxieties around it that we talked about before, the legal anxieties. For a little while, I explored benzodiazepine use and could see how a habit on that, and then I got a flood of people coming in with benzodiazepine problems and saw the absolutely horrendous withdrawals that people got. So I danced away from getting a habit on that. I think I had enough habits that I was doing away with, and so fast forward many years later, where a lot of that stuff had been cleaned right out of my life for such a long time, I had started to use benzodiazepines occasionally to help with anxiety. And so that very, very infrequent and irregular use, I guess, kept me interested in what benzos are, because they're so effective in the short term and so horrendously hard to get off in the long term. So I decided that I would go and give myself a benzo habit, and that I would do that knowingly and figure out what the parameters of that were and go past them in terms of use, so I could know that I had not only that I had a proper dependency on them. So I spoke to some doctor friends and formulated how that would normally look for a person that they would note in their practice. And from that, I took my own advice, not their guidance or counsel, and gave myself a benzo habit over a period of about a month. Using it heavily and using it really heavily. And then I tried to stop cold turkey. And I've been, this is kind of drama speak here, cold turkey and this and that, but it was actually quite an intense experience. So I stopped cold turkey, and about 80 hours later, I started vomiting with anxiety, and I was all sorts of, like, if I hadn't have known what was happening to me, I would have been, it would have been not a good scene, but I knew it was happening to me. And so I waited that out as long as I could. And then I took Delta 8. And I managed to come from taking how much I was taking, which was about 30 milligrams a day of benzodiazepine. I managed to bring myself off completely within 1 week with no significant withdrawals or discomfort. That was anything past just adjusting to not being in this kind of like, this really sedated state. And Delta 8 not only replaced that, but I then stopped taking it shortly thereafter. And so it had been so effective in helping me with the reset that I didn't need to take it. And I don't need to take it regularly, which is, I think that's the measure of a really fine substance as a medicine, is that if it gives you a profound benefit that you don't become reliant on past a reasonable point, then that's why I kind of call it the Goldilocks molecule. For me, it's Goldilocks. It's amazing. And so I've now seen that replicated amongst many people.
So it's kind of like tobacco, weaning off tobacco or opioids. You get that kind of harm reduction element from your experience is kind of what you're saying.
Not only harm reduction, just for people, most people,
addiction.
Many people do not come off these substances because it is horrendous.
Yeah.
It's when you've got a life to keep together, when you've got all these things that we've got, to then be thinking of withdrawing, not only can it be difficult for people to withdraw, but then with the time to do that, if it's over an extended time, it can be just so debilitating for so many people. Just don't stop taking things, so they're stuck on them. So I've always been interested in how you
break the cycle,
interrupt. So interrupt, because I'd had so many different substance dependencies myself in the past. I was always, it's one of my holy grails is how do you get something that helps people so profoundly that they don't need to get stuck on, because it's not that great. It doesn't make you feel that great that you're attached to it so deeply, but it feels it's reassuring enough to take you through. Substance withdrawals can be really difficult for people. And
yeah, of course.
So that's
it's just on, but you're talking about the potential for Delta 8 to be, I guess, potentially as big as CBD. I know there's been discussions on the legal side that it's a bit of a loophole in the US because, Delta 9 is what's,
illegal.
Illegal, exactly. So
yeah, they don't have the same analogs laws as somewhere like Australia. We have very, very, very comprehensive and, in my view, very
catch all.
Yeah, catch all. Any cannabis derivative, it's all Schedule 8 or 9, and yeah, only CBD 98% or more is Schedule 4 for those playing along at home. But no, I'm interested if it was to be sort of the next big thing that takes off. I mean, it still gets people high. Like, it's still psychoactive, so there would be some level of reluctance on that basis too, right?
But you can buy a bud now from a 10-minute phone conversation on your telehealth. So I don't think there's any true barrier to it being available. I don't actually expect it to be as available as CBD, in my view, should be, which is totally OTC, no questions asked. I'm not into handing this over the counter to kids. I'm into it being made medically available to people and becoming part of the recreational landscape once things do develop and there is hopefully more open and adequate dispensaries around the place. I'd love to see that happen here. I don't know that it's going to happen, but I'd love to see that happen here for a range of cannabinoids. But I'm a real advocate for its responsible use. I really am. I don't think that cannabinoids are harmless. I don't think they are all child's play. I think they are, when accurately used, they are one of the most incredible tools that we have in our toolkit of human medicine. And I think that it's an amazing plant, but when used in the wrong way, it has some real downsides. So I think Delta 8, just like CBD, has the chance to come out and fill a really large niche and gain acceptance from a better place than it could otherwise have ever had the chance to, because of these new changes and things. But it's so benign. Honestly, it's really, really, I've never seen anyone freak out on Delta 8. That's just not true of Delta 9 THC. And I've seen people in a great deal of distress, in a state of breakdown, let's call it that, who were still able to have it and it not trigger them in a way that other cannabis possibly could. And that I would know that CBD by itself would be very, very, it would be some comfort perhaps, but not really strongly causative in a really profound medical benefit for that person at that time. So I'm very excited about it because of that. It gives you something stronger. It's another avenue that I'm excited about understanding how far that goes. You know, what other conditions can we create? You know, I love whole plant. I love organic. I think that's all of that stuff is so incredible. And there's a plus end, which is that we can then take these molecules in isolate forms, make compounds that are targeted. And why wouldn't we? Like, but I'm just about it all being made available in its right way as much as possible. And from that, then we get citizen research scientists, you know, we get pharma companies, we get farmers, we get everyone doing their own thing to figure out what's the best use of this. And that's where I see it going. I'm, you know, pretty optimistic about that overall, that's where this is going. And things take time, they certainly do, and that sucks for many people, but I think we will get to.
We'll get there. I've actually, on that that point around, you know, where it's all sort of heading, we've asked a few guests on the show, you know, when do you think cannabis is actually going to be legalized for recreational use in Australia? And if I can get you to tack on top of that, when we get your response to that, because I feel like you're going to tell us next week, and I hope you're right. No, but when we do get your response to that, I'm interested to know what your role might be in the industry whenever that should happen.
Good. The latter part of that question would be dinosaur. That's my role. I'll be a relic in a museum now. Look, where's it going? Where's it going? Look, it has to end up. It could one almost call it. Here's a question to counter the question. Could one almost call it recreationally available, that one can call up now and order weed in the mail for a medical condition? Yes, definitely. But there's still a lot of choice in that. So could it almost be that this is it's a little like that for it to be made if you want to talk legal recreationally as a sanctioned thing, as a completely federal, from like the
US,
doctorless interaction with cannabis.
5 years.
5 years. Okay.
I mean, there's other people are much more optimistic about that. And I think that I'm almost being optimistic saying 5 years.
I agree with you personally. I think maybe closer to 10 for THC for sure.
Okay, yeah. And that wouldn't be an unreasonable.
CBD, I think within maybe 3 to 5.
Yeah.
But I just can't see the TGA doing THC anytime soon. There's just a person. Not that I don't want it, I do want it, but I just can't see it happening. If you know what I mean. And
there has been, I don't know how much this matters, but I think it does come into it in a country as small as ours that there's been so much politically around the medicalisation of this and making such a strong divide that to then go into a recreational space with it when so many companies have. I mean, do you guys have an idea of what the total investment in both known private equity and public equity is in the
it goes into the billions.
It would be. I heard 1.6 billion about a while ago, and I don't know if that's entirely true, but that is a significant amount of money put down through the medical model, through all of these very difficult hoops that people have had to jump. So I feel like if or when it does become recreational, that it'll probably be done in really small increments, still controlled by many of the structures that are controlling it now.
Which to Mitch's point as well, I mean, I agree the TGA wouldn't like the idea of THC, but then I look at, say, alcohol and how is alcohol regulated in this country, and there's food safety standards. So would we potentially see it as it moves into that realm being taken out of the hands of the TGA, and the TGA is only there to deal with cannabis in a medicinal form?
God willing, no. I don't know, but I think that it would be more reasonable to think that CBD might start to become more OTC and then maybe able to be given out by some natural doctors with maybe a prescriber's course or something. I think it's going to be really slow and incremental. When we can go and buy, CBD seedsman buds over at a tobacconist like you can in Europe. Last time I was over there, I remember going to a little 7-Eleven kind of thing, and there was this menu in the tobacco cupboard that was just all CBD buds. And so how long have we got till that? A long way. We really do lag very far behind. And I once again think with the amount of investment that's been thrown down and all of that influence and lobbying brought to bear, that there'd be outrage amongst the industry, and some of them are industry heavyweights, and I think would still exert a fair bit of a boot to stick up someone's ass in Canberra. So, I think the opiate industry, that was what was holding it back for a long time. There has been investments, and I wouldn't pretend to know how extensive by the opiate industry and various medical cannabis interests in the country. And so, I think once again, there's a huge amount of industry pressure that would still get in the way of further.
Just follow the money, as always. Follow the money.
Every day, yeah. And
saying that,
change of government, could we have some independents maybe start to throw down a bit more on the medical cannabis debate? I'm not sure, with COVID looming so large, and that's going to be the political battleground. My view in the next election largely is how was it or how should it around this whole issue. That's what I think will happen next year in the elections. So I don't know how much of a feature medical cannabis will actually be at all in the political debate for quite some time. I think maybe it's more of a bureaucratic process now and an industry-driven thing. Because it is
getting some traction in WA. Brian Walker, and I can't remember, there was another senator.
I'd forgotten about that, for sure. They're independents, right? They're outsiders. Yeah. So if you got enough of them together, could we get some kind of pressure in the blocks? I don't know, but I'd like to think so. Yeah. And I think that it will still trudge along a bit. I would like to see first, as a really strong symbolic gesture, that cannabis gets decriminalised recreationally. Of course, I want it to be legal. I want adult use and all that stuff. But as a first gesture, a really good place to start from. Decriminalise it, for fuck's sake.
I think we're forgetting.
Socially, it is decriminalised. Let's face it.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we're forgetting that it is decriminalised for adult use, at least in one place in Australia.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
So it's not hard to fathom that we could follow a state-based kind of solution similar to what they do in the States.
Correct, but we've seen a great disparity between states' legislation, and have had that's been reversed after quite some time. There was a point where you could have 4 plants down in Adelaide, and then it went to 1, then nothing, and then it come across the border, and it was absolutely still verboten. So, those changes now are far, far less likely to be wound back. Obviously, there's the regulatory landscape's changed, the political sort of things changed so much that I don't think you'll get too much wind back. But there was still a lot of federal pushback in the situation in Canberra. It never amounted to anything, but there was still talk of federal police arresting people for small amounts of pot there. And so I'm glad to see that hasn't happened much. But is that going to necessarily, we've seen with the corona thing, how different the states' legislative processes can be? It's hard. It's difficult for the states to get along often in legislation. So, things have got to be, I guess, federally brought in, but there's still a lot of pushback from the states. So I don't know. What do you think in terms of, you said sort of 5 to 10 years? What's your call?
I think you're on the money there, Luke. I'd say 5 to 10 is probably about as much time as the medical industry as we know it needs to evolve to continue to change our national psyche around how we think about it, and to sort of reduce the kind of the safety reduce its profile as being potentially this harmful reefer madness. I think we've made a lot of inroads, but the one thing I can confirm is when the day should come that we get federal harmony with the laws of a state or territory, and and we know it's going to be recreationally available, we're going to throw one heck of an Altmed party. We'll probably spend about I don't know. I was going to say we're going to do a big Zoom call and get all our guests on, but we'll probably end up being able to do it in person, hopefully, when that day should come.
We'll see the smoke signals from everywhere.
Yeah, we'll be hosting it in a sauna, just a massive hot box situation. I'd say
bad sitting on them.
It's Delta 8, of course.
Delta 8, indeed.
Look, I'd love to at some level be a part of something. I've courted so many different ideas in myself and from other people about how I'd fit into it, from being offered sales jobs to equity in a company, to whatever, to startups, to organizations that have already got their license. And so, as interesting as a lot of those things are, to be honest with you, I still find that with a balance between what I wanted to bring in my life, which is more time with the family, just more time in general, get a rest up after the kind of battle, so to speak. I still haven't found something that I really want to do, other than start to offer a couple of licensed products. That's something I've been talking about for ages, and curse me if I continue talking about it and doing not much about it for much longer. But it's actually been a function of me just establishing a balance in my life. And what we do, even though it has not grown for a long time, and there's been some slowdown, we still have a very busy service providing to people who are, for whatever reason, indisposed to find it elsewhere. And so I, had expected to disintegrate before this in the organisational capacity to assist patients, because I thought the uptake in the licensed model would be more comprehensive given the availability of it. So now people, often by choice, as I said before, are still seeking out people like myself. So there's still that's still quite a consuming task for me, is making that available and continuing to make sure that's of the best quality, etc. So I'd like to continue doing what I do. Really, that would be, I would be quite happy with even if it's a much smaller niche of what I already do, because that's what I'm good at. That's what I really love doing. It affords me a great deal of freedom to work in the way I'd like to. Is that sustainable, or is that a smart idea to do? Is that the right thing to do from a business decision? I don't know. I think that I'll find where I want to be when I want to be there, and I'm still here. So largely, and I still get a lot out of doing what I do at a personal level. It's still something I feel really strongly about. I'm just glad that there's that now people are finding me out of choice. And yeah, I would like to do something. I've recently got very close to something that I'd like to do, but it would really have meant, in literal terms, it used to be that people would approach us with really amazing offers if you stop doing what you're doing, and then at some point you'll be able to help people. And that was never attractive, but I recently got to keep doing what you're doing and do this as well. And we'll draw a great big line in the sand there, and you can take part in this. And that was super attractive, but also I had to look at, well, that's on top of what I'm already doing. So time is the most precious thing. Yeah. And I'm still enjoying time with a little 8-month-old girl, and putting back in time that I didn't when my boy was young, till he was about 1.5 years. I didn't see him a lot of the time, like the majority of it. Yeah. And so I'm giving to him giving to her, my little girl Acacia, what I wasn't able to give to Tamer, which is a lot of presence in a way that I wasn't able to do before. So I'm a bit loath to let go of that, to be honest.
Yeah, well, you might end up just scaling back, and I see a bit of a Delta 8 venture on the horizon. Down the line. So we'll keep an eye out for that.
You got me again. You brought me back to the elephant I was trying to get away from.
No, to be honest,
it sat on me. I couldn't get away.
He's already finished with Delta 8. He's moving on to Delta 7 next. Delta 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Yeah. Hey, Luke. Honestly, it has been our pleasure having you on. We knew that. We're going to tap into a few war stories and hit some sweet spots, and you've delivered in spades. So we cannot thank you enough. And I reckon we might do this again a little bit down the line.
I'm sad we have to cut it off now, but the truth is, I think I remember the first time I spoke to Luke, and we're on a WhatsApp call or something like that. And I think I got off the call 4.5 hours later. So I know how much left there is to talk about.
Consider this part 1, Luke, but I reckon we'll be back for many more parts to come if you'll jump back on the show with us.
Sure. No. Thanks for your time.
No, thanks so much, Luke. We'll speak soon.
Thanks, Luke. Cheers.
Okay.